time. It's our time, my friends. Time for millions of maturepreneurs, 55 plus, who are hashtag not done by a long shot, to revolutionize how we lead, do business, and innovate our world. I'm your host, Jeanette Anderson, and welcome to my conversations with fascinating people who would rather inspire than retire. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Maturepreneur podcast. I am your hostess with the mostest, Jeanette Anderson, and today I am here with a friend, a client of an inspiring woman, a woman who literally, I believe, single-handedly started the organizing movement in North America and around the world. We'll talk about that more, and who is also just an incredible reinventionist, even though Barbara's been doing the same work, passionately supporting people in being organized and clearing clutter and living a better life. She has been constantly reinventing herself and her passions. And so we're going to talk about that today. Welcome, Barbara. I'm so glad you're here.
Oh, thank you, Jeanette. I am glad to be here. I just love being around you. Our vibes, I think, work really well together. So I'm really excited for the opportunity.
Awesome. Thank you. And tell everybody where you're joining us from.
I live in Raleigh, North Carolina.
All right. I lived there a long time ago. Beautiful, beautiful city. So let me tell you the official word, and then we're going to dive behind the scenes and get the juicy, tidbits and updates. And then talk about this amazing topic of how exactly do we leave clutter or less clutter, more life, leave a legacy that matters. So Barbara Hemphill is the Vision Accelerator and founder of Productive Environment Institute. She's passionate about helping entrepreneurs and leaders eliminate clutter and accelerate their vision to leave a legacy that matters. She started her career in organizing in 1978 with a $7 ad and in a New York newspaper. A team of certified productive environment specialists delivers her world-class expertise virtually. Her first best-selling book, Taming the Paper Tiger, helped her launch and grow the organizing industry. Her signature book, Less Clutter, More Life, reveals that physical and digital clutter is a symptom of emotional and spiritual clutter, which we are going to talk about shortly. So yeah, I love that. And I love that you've been doing this for that long. That's an amazing legacy. It's a long time to be doing work like this work, but clearly you still love it.
I love it more than ever. And I honestly feel like that I was born for this moment in history. I'm a great Bible believer, and one of the things it says is that you were created, your plan was created before you were in your mother's womb, which means that if you are living at this moment in history, it is specifically because you belonged here right now. And as you mentioned, I started that whole industry. I went to the Small Business Administration in Washington, D.C. in 1979 to ask them to help me start a business organizing homes. They laughed me out of the room and said, this is not a business. Nobody is going to pay for organizing closets and cupboards. And the last I saw, it's an $11 billion industry.
Right.
And my belief is that as it relates to organizing in businesses, we are now at this moment in history where I was with organizing homes 40 years ago. I spent years trying to sell organizing services to companies, and I sold to a few, but not very many. And the reason was that the check writers, the management, did not understand the productivity and profitability cost that clutter was causing, because they would ask employees for something and they would get it. What they didn't know was that 4 employees stopped work for 20 minutes looking for it. But COVID changed that. Because the clutter was hidden, nobody really paid attention to it.
Mhm.
But two things, I mean, on the residential front, now you used to have one person working from a home office. Suddenly you had two, three, four, five people working from a home office. And
Mhm.
suddenly the clutter was like, oh my gosh, we've got to clean up all this clutter. And then in the offices, then when we started going back into the offices and we started going to hybrid workspaces,
Mhm.
or downsizing entirely. One of our clients had a company with 18 employees. They decided they were going to get rid of the building to cut costs.
Mhm.
They sent everybody home, and the owner, much to his dismay, discovered it took 2 days for him and his son to clear up all the clutter that had been left behind.
Right.
Well, it was there all the time, but nobody paid any attention. And employees in every company, I've learned, there's always one employee who would love to clean it up, but they're not empowered to do so.
Yes.
And so, and the employees are not going to do it unless management participates. So like one of my favorite, my all-time favorite service is something we call a productive environment day, or in some cultures, a productivity party, which is a clutter clearing day. And
Yes.
the role that I or our consultants play is basically making sure the boss stays and participates so that together they are clearing the clutter.
Yes, because otherwise it just gets to be do as I say, not as I do.
Absolutely.
They need to see the results of the empowerment and the space that it creates physically and emotionally and spiritually and mentally. So let's go back just a second and tell me a little bit more about you. So, what's something that people would never guess, and maybe even your friends don't know? What's something about you people wouldn't guess from reading your bio or your book or your website?
Well, one of the things is I grew up, my friends would know this, but a lot of people listening to this would know it. I grew up on a farm in Nebraska, lived in the second floor of a tenant farmhouse with no running water. When I was a baby, I went to one room country school with one teacher and 9 grades, and was bullied much of that time, which made a big impact on my life. It's impacted me, and you were my coach for a while. You know very much how much that impacted my life. So that's but I'm a believer. One of my favorite verses in the Bible is in Joel, where it says, "The Lord will restore the years the locusts have eaten."
Mhm.
And that's what's happened with me. I mean, I tried to commit suicide at age 11. I was in a mental hospital for depression in my 40s. And today I've never felt better, enjoyed life more. So the message that I want to give people is never give up.
Mm. Oh, beautiful. Okay, there was a bunch of things in there that I want to come back to. Not the least of which is um, uh, I also know that you're a big singer. You love singing as well, right?
Oh,
And
I do.
so,
Yes, absolutely. I take singing lessons and sing
yeah,
in a recital, and I play the piano at church every Sunday. And
beautiful. So I was just visiting a fellow singer, and she's so excited about that. And you light up when you talk about that. So I think that there is a huge amount that creativity does for us in terms of keeping us vibrant and alive and having that part of us fed. So what got you what's your why? Why do you do this work? Why have you done it for so long? Why are you so passionate about it? Why does organization light you up?
well, it's interesting. I don't know if you remember this, but it was as I was a student of your coaching, and you asked me that question. And I said, it's because I want to give other people hope. And I had said I wanted on my tombstone, she gave others hope. And you said to me something I've never forgotten. And I've told this story many, many times since then. You said to me, that is not your why, that is your what.
Mm,
And when you said that, I really did not have a clue what you meant.
mhm,
But as we worked through it together, the conclusion was that I spent the majority of my life feeling hopeless.
mm,
And I didn't want anybody else to feel that way. And I feel that way today more than ever, particularly as I age, because I won an award of 100 Women to Know in America. And I was at the awards ceremony and we were sitting, it was a receptionist, and I overheard somebody say, "Oh, next week's my 50th birthday." And I went over to her and I said, "I couldn't help overhearing what you said. And I just want you to know that your 50th birthday can be the beginning of the best part of your life." Because my years, at that point, I was 75. I said, my years between 50 and 75 have been infinitely better than they were 25 to 50.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And statistically, you may know this, but statistically, people are the happiest at their life at the very beginning and towards the very end. That people are happier, more well adjusted, have better emotional intelligence, and basically are just more content the older we get. And so that's part of why it's actually really good idea to have older people working in corporations, because it helps balance out all those stressed out 30 to 50-year-olds that are unhappy with their life and have this great, "I have a great life, how come I'm not happy" syndrome going on. But corporations won't hire those older people nearly enough. So that's a whole other rant about my maturepreneur world that I'm working on. So what is the piece that really gives you life? What's the part of the work that you do that fills your cup?
Well, for years, my license plate on my vehicle said paperless,
Mhm.
because I said I didn't believe, or that's wrong. The license plate said less paper
Ah,
as opposed to paperless,
right.
because for the majority of people over 50, paperless is not really a good option. It isn't for me. I have no intention of being paperless. I don't have to be, and I have no intention. But less paper is essential because most of us have way, way too much.
Mhm.
Well, a few years ago, I got a new car. And when I got the new car, I thought, okay, I want to have a new license plate.
Mhm.
And so I had an index card. I'm a big fan of index cards.
Yeah.
And I had one with a list of potential names of what could be on my license plate. And I took them into the DMV, and one of them was hopeful.
Mhm.
And the clerk said, "Well, that one's already taken." She says, "Oh, I love doing this." And I thought, oh, good. And she said, "Hopeful's taken." But she said, and she printed this out and handed it to me. She said, "I don't know if you like this." It said Hope Fool. I said, "Oh, I love it." I said, "Number one, I'm a fool for Jesus. And number two, HOPE stands for Help Others Pursue Entrepreneurship, which I've been doing for 40 years.
Yes.
So it becomes a great marketing thing, because I've always wanted on my license plate something that would make people ask me what it meant. So that's what I would do. And it started lots of conversations. Well, then a couple of months ago, there's so much in the news now about people feeling just so discouraged and frightened and overwhelmed. And I was actually, about a couple of 3 or 4 years ago, maybe, I was at a business conference, and I made the comment that in Greek, the word Barbara means stranger. And that made me feel really sad. It's like, oh, I don't want to be a stranger, but I did. I mean, I love to speak from the platform, but when I'm in social settings, in groups, going to parties and things is not my thing.
Mm.
And in fact, when I lived in New York City, I used to walk blocks because I didn't want to ask the bus driver whether or not I was on the right bus, because I didn't want to look like a stupid girl from Nebraska living in New York City.
Right.
And so I did feel like a stranger. And this coach said to me, "You are a stranger because this world is not your home."
Mm.
And I thought, wow. And that completely changed it. Well, that's like a couple of years ago. Well, then I was thinking about that license plate, and the discouragement in the world, and people, even one of my children who's in a very difficult situation and very unhappy. HOPE also stands for Help Others Pursue Eternity.
Mm.
And one of the questions, I offer a service called Vision Accelerator.
Mhm.
which is for people, it's mostly women. I get a few men, but it's
Mhm.
mostly women who are in some transition. You know, it's widowhood, being a widow, or an empty nest, or they've worked all their lives. And I talked to one person who'd worked in a library for 35 years. She was retiring, but she didn't really want to quit. You know, it's like, I want to do something else, but I don't know what. Or one of my clients had wanted to write a book for 17 years, and 3 months later, it was on Amazon. So Vision Accelerator was something that, and I believe that um, we can create a life. I ask questions. If you were to leave this earth tonight,
Mhm.
what regrets would you have?
Mhm.
And the answer to that question is a form of clutter,
Mm.
because I define clutter as anything that prevents you from accomplishing your work or enjoying your life.
Okay.
And if there's something that you regret, then that is causing you to not accomplish your work. And I did it myself. So I asked myself that question when I first started doing this a couple of years ago. And my answer was, I was estranged from one of my adopted children. No, it wasn't a negative relationship. It just wasn't a relationship. And she wasn't very responsive. And I thought, boy, if I died tonight, I would feel really sad. And I was thinking, oh, there's nothing I can do about it because I've reached out. And then I thought, you know what? There's nothing that says I can't get on an airplane and show up on her doorstep.
Mhm.
So it was in January, I decided that if by May, by Mother's Day, we hadn't gotten together, I literally was going to get on an airplane and fly there and show up on her doorstep. Well, I think that shows the power of intentions,
Yes.
because then what happened is she did text me and we began to have a community. And actually, before Mother's Day, she actually flew and spent 2 days with me.
Ah,
So it describes the power of intention.
absolutely. I totally agree with that. So talk a little bit more about clutter as anything that gets in the way of loving your life and having peace, and the role that regret plays. How do we clear clutter and regret? Like, how are those two tied, and how does clearing one help the other?
Well, one of the things, so clutter is postponed decisions. That's the 4 words that this business has built on. I learned it from clothes closets,
Mhm.
but it's true of piles of paper, it's true of email, it's true of to-do lists, you know, whatever it is.
Mhm.
But so the question becomes, why aren't we making the decisions? What is it that prevents us from making the decisions?
Mhm.
And the answer is, it's emotion.
Mhm.
So I first learned it because when I was doing houses, I was finding that when there were people who were reluctant to get rid of things, to let go of things,
Mhm.
if I ask enough questions, I would always discover that there was a severe emotional loss in their life.
Mhm.
And I was autographing books at Barnes and Noble one time, and I made that comment, and a young man walked up to me and he said, my apartment is full of stuff. He said, it's frankly mostly paper. He said, I haven't had anybody in it for months. I come home from work at night and I say, okay, tonight is the night I'm going to clean this up. And he said, I become physically paralyzed. And he said, I sort on my bed because it's the biggest flat surface. He said, there are nights when I literally shove the papers aside and crawl into bed with my paper.
Mhm.
And he looked at me and he said, my mother died when I was 6.
Mhm.
Are you telling me that I have to deal with the grief of losing my mother before I can handle the paper?
Mhm.
And I said, well, I'm not a mental health professional, so I can't answer that directly, but I can tell you what I know from experience. If you find someone you trust, most likely not a family member,
Mhm.
that can help you decide what you need and want to keep, not what you think you should or what somebody else thinks you should, but what is it that you need to accomplish your work and enjoy your life? You will solve your paper problem.
Mm,
and it will help the other emotions as well, because the more we control how you handle one part of your life is how you handle the rest of your life. And
mhm,
so that's how it impacts. I told that story. I was speaking at a university. There were about 700 executive women. I told that story. A woman walked up to me and she said, "You just saved my marriage."
mm,
I said, "Wow, that's pretty dramatic. Do you mind elaborating?" And she said, "I came here with the intention of telling my husband, to whom I've been married for 13 years, that I was leaving because he's a pack rat and I have allergies and I can't deal with all this stuff." And then she stopped and the tears started coming down her eyes. And she said, "I never understood until I heard you speak that it wasn't that he wouldn't let go, but that he couldn't.
mhm,
His mother died when he was 7."
mhm.
And I
Yeah.
said, "May I make a suggestion?" She said, "Yes." And I said, "Go home and say something to the effect of, I've never understood." She says, "I've never understood." I told her to say, "I've never understood until I heard Barbara speak how important this is to you. Let's figure out how you can keep it and we can still live together."
Mm,
Taking that approach completely changed the dynamics, because what happens is, most situation is, the more somebody says you don't need that, the more they hang on.
yeah.
And suddenly he felt heard. And I stayed in touch for, I don't know, 6 to 8 months. And what would happen would be, he would look at like a collection and he'd say, "Oh, okay, we can take a picture of this and then we can let it go." Because the more she told him to get rid of it, the more he hung on. And then once he felt heard, and that brings up the emotion is what it's all about. That's what prevents us. So the number one starting point, 80%
Mhm,
of getting and staying organized, of letting clutter go,
mhm,
is believing that you can do it.
mm. Yes, because it's so daunting. We think that it's just too big, too impossible. So tell me a little bit more about the postponed decisions, because I know there's some people who might have heard that and said, no, that's not true. I just don't have time. I'm too busy. I don't have time for
Mhm.
all of this. There's too many demands and so forth and so on. So it's not that I'm postponing, it's just that there's too much. So what would you say to them?
Well, there probably is too much, but it's not going to get any less. I mean, it's like, and the irony is that the longer, so when people reach out to us to hire us,
Hmm.
the questions they always want to know is, how long is this going to take and how much is it going to cost?
Hmm.
And to which we say, well, we don't know until we know more about you and what your needs are. One of the things we need to know is how quickly you make decisions.
Yes. Yeah.
And once we know that, then we can do it. But what we can tell you for absolute sure is, the longer you wait, the longer it's going to take, and the more it's going to cost in lost opportunities.
Yes, yes, yes. So let's talk about that for a moment from, let's say, the leadership perspective. Um, because a lot of people listening to this are either currently leaders in their life and their family and their community, or have been leaders in their business world for a long time, might be switching back to starting a business or social enterprise. How can they think about clutter and their life and their leadership? So what's the relationship between leadership and being organized, thinking about that, the cultures that we create, the environments that we create?
So one of the taglines that I've used through the years, you mentioned me having reinvented myself many times, so there are many different, and one of them is, great leaders create great cultures.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody's a leader of somebody. So
Mm-hmm.
I will go back to 46 years ago when I first started in residences, and most of them were mothers of children.
Mm-hmm.
And when I would walk in, one of the things they would complain about was their children's clutter. And I would say, "Let's go look at your office."
Mm,
Or if they didn't have an office, your bedroom.
yeah.
And there would be clutter. And
Yeah.
I would say, "You have no right, no credibility to tell your children to clear up their clutter if you haven't cleared up yours."
Right.
And the other thing is, whenever we started with a client in a relationship, whether it was a boss employee relationship or a team relationship or a husband and wife situation, we always told our client, we're going to deal with your stuff, not anybody else's. And you don't need to talk to other people about it.
Mm.
Don't talk to other people about what you're doing. Just, don't talk of love, show me. I mean, it's the same thing. It's like, don't talk about what you're doing, just do it. And then people are truly amazed. So we just had a client recently who struggled with client for 5 decades, I think. She's in her 70s and went through a divorce that was terrible and all kinds of things and lots of abuse. And so there was clutter everywhere. And it's just something that she's, lived with. And her family has been kind of abused her children, disrespectful of her because of all the clutter.
Yes.
And her son came to visit her this weekend and he was astounded.
Hmm.
He couldn't believe it and realized, interestingly enough, that a lot of the clutter that was in her garage was actually his clutter.
Yeah. Yeah. Kids don't remember that they dump a lot of stuff on their parents' doorstep. So let's talk a little bit about how do people who might be daunted by whatever they are facing, whether it's a small pile of bills or a house full of hoarder, level clutter, how do they get started? Because you mentioned, it's an emotional thing and it can be very daunting and overwhelming. How do you just get started?
Well, I am biased, and I will say that. I am biased that there's one area that you need to organize. It's the hardest. It's what people wait the last to do. But when you do it, it will impact everything else. And most importantly, it will teach you decision-making skills because that's what this is all about. And that is paper.
Mm.
So you think about it, anybody listening to this, think about if you've ever moved or downsized or relocated. I'll venture to say the
Yeah.
last thing you dealt with were the boxes of memorabilia and old files.
Yes.
Everybody puts that last.
Yes.
Why is paper so hard? It's not the paper, it's what the paper represents.
Hmm.
It represents our hopes, our dreams, our fears. It's the shame. People are so shamed. In fact, if you Google clutter is postponed decisions, you will see that it's quoted often, or I should say misquoted, because people will say clutter is simply postponed decisions or only postponed decisions or merely postponed decisions. So if you're having trouble making decisions or if you're having trouble letting go of clutter and somebody just says to me, oh, it's just postponed decisions, they just added to your shame. It's like, oh, it's just postponed decisions.
Yes.
So why am I making such a big deal? I can't tell you the amount of number of times that I've seen that.
Mm-hmm.
So it is, so where you start,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, with not all of our clients, but I would say probably 80% of our clients. Some people we start with email because email is the biggest productivity drain in our society today. So some people start with email, so we can do it. We actually have 2 boot camps. We have one boot camp, which is a virtual working together, and we have one that's called Total Office Transformation Boot Camp, which is paper and physical things. And then we have Digital Transformation Boot Camp. Most people start with the paper first, but some people are so overwhelmed with their email that they can't relax about anything else until they deal with that. So they do digital first, but that's where you start. You start with, and if you will start with either paper or digital, everything else will get easier because you're going to learn how to make decisions and you're going to deal with the emotion and you're going to have the support to make those decisions to learn. We get lots of clients. One of my clients said she'd work with 3 organizers in 2 states and paid over $10,000 and felt worse when she was done than when she started.
Mhm.
And
Aw.
the only reason I found that out was because she was a friend of mine. I'd never been to her house, but she was a friend, a business colleague, or whatever, and she was taking a new job. And she had told me what trouble she had with clutter. And so, as a gift to her, as kind of a congratulations gift, I offered to help her get organized so she'd be ready for her new job.
Mhm.
And she wouldn't take, I wasn't going to charge her anything. And she wouldn't take me up on it. And I couldn't figure out why. It's like, why would you not?
Yeah.
After a period of time, I found out it's because she said, I think I'm hopeless. She said, I hired 3 organizers in 2
Mhm.
states and paid $10,000, and I'm worse off now than I was before.
Mm.
And I said, that's because they didn't address the issue, and the issue was the shame and the emotion. And as soon as we got to that, so we worked together. So I said, let's just work for 4 hours together.
Mhm.
Just try me out for 4 hours. And at the end of the 4 hours, she was ecstatic.
Mhm.
And I said, okay, so tell me what was different about what we did. And she said there were 2 things. One, she said, I never understood that my piles of paper were postponed decisions.
Mhm.
And secondly, you didn't tell me what I should do.
Mhm.
You asked me what I was willing to do.
Mhm.
And there are many people, we get David Allen and Marie Kondo dropouts.
Mhm.
Both of them have systems which absolutely work. They
Mhm.
absolutely work, but they are the shoulds. This
Mhm.
is the way you should do it. And if you're not willing to do that, it's not going to work. And if they try it, we get clients who've tried it and it didn't work. And then they think they're at fault.
Right.
They're not at fault because organizing and productivity is an art.
Yes.
And no 2 people are the same. And part of the reason I love this, even after 46 years, is that God did not create any 2 people or any 2 organizations the same.
Yeah.
So every client, every situation is different.
Yes, I love it. Okay, so speaking of your joy, although, okay, I know people will be mad if I don't ask you. Tell us 2 tips or 1 tip for managing email, because you mentioned it, and I immediately flashed to the 29,000 emails I have in my inbox. So what? How do we? How do we not have email be such a bear?
So this morning, well, I told you we had this digital boot camp, and we had a class that it's 5 classes, and we had the 3rd class today. And one of the students said, I've got the piece of paper because I just got off the call. She had 135,000 emails when we started. She was down to 25 this morning.
Wow. Okay. First of all, I don't feel so bad now because I've got 29,000 because like that's a lot. And down to 25. Okay.
Yep.
So what's one of the tips that you give the people about being able to keep all of those from piling up?
Well, first of all, growing up on the farm, my daddy used to say to me, half of any job, he would say, is having the right tool.
Hmm,
It's actually half of any job is using the right tool.
hmm,
So one of the tools, it's not our tool, but we teach people to use it, is something called Maelstrom, Mailstrom.
mhm.
And Maelstrom will get rid of hundreds of emails very, very quickly and very comfortably, and it doesn't have to delete them. It's ways to get them out. So that would be one tool. But let me go back and talk about paper, because handling paper and handling email are exactly the same. They're in a different format, but the decision making is the same. So let's talk about paper. So with a piece of paper, you can pick up any piece of paper anywhere in your life. There are only 3 decisions you can make about it: file, act, or toss. File means, I don't know if I'll ever need it, but I don't have the guts to throw it away.
Okay.
So it's going in a reference file, and we help our clients create what we call a finding system as opposed to a filing system.
Okay.
Act means the ball is in my court, either to do it or to delegate it.
Mhm.
And so then the question is, what do I have to do and when? And then you have to have a system for that. And 3 is toss. So in our office transformation boot camp, one of the first exercises we have people do it. And in these boot camps, we do it together. Everybody's kind of doing it all together.
Yeah.
They're on Zoom, but they're there. And they go give a pile of paper from anywhere, off the kitchen counter, from the garage, I don't care where it is. And then you're going to create 3 piles. You're going to pick up each piece of paper and say, is this an act? Is this a file? Is this an act? Or is it a toss?
Mhm.
The interesting thing is how difficult it is to get people to do that, because here's what happens. They see this one and they say, oh, I could do this in 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And then they do it. And now we're done organizing.
Yeah.
So we force them for that period of time to do nothing more than sort into file, act, and toss. It's exactly the same with email. When you open up an email, there's only 3 decisions. You can either file it someplace in case you ever need it again. You can act on it, turn it into a task, answer it, whatever, or toss. My business partner, Andrea Anderson, years ago, when we first started working together, she said, Barbara, it's not enough to make the decision. You have to have a way to implement the decision.
Mhm.
And she's right. And we use the acronym SYSTEM, saving you space, time, energy, and money.
Mm.
Every time there's something you have to do repeatedly, whether it's brushing your teeth or filing your taxes, you have to have a system.
Mhm.
So you need a system for managing your paper and a system for managing your email. And we have what we call the Magic 6, which is a way that is the system that we help them create and customize so that they can do it.
Okay. I love that. So part of it is acting on that right then and there. So to follow up, because there's so many things that are deeper that I want to ask you, but those act ones, do you leave them in your inbox or do you put them in a folder that says take action?
Yeah, no, you don't leave them in your inbox. And the same with paper. Okay. So instead of inbox, we think of it as your to sort. And
Okay.
the deal is if you have a pile of papers, like I just came back from a trip. And so when I come back from a trip, I take everything and put it in the inbox. So right now it's pretty thick because I was gone for a while. I can rifle down through it and pull out the things I know are important. But once I pull it out, I have to decide
Okay.
now what is it? It's a way of holding you accountable and making you giving you a system for making decisions.
Okay. So I love all these tips and I could talk to you about this all day long, but folks, go and get her books. These will help you. Do reach out, and they have a lot of different kinds of classes and so forth. We'll talk about some resources in a few minutes, but let's talk about your journey as an entrepreneur, because you've been through a lot of iterations of your business. You've got a business partner and you've been through a lot with her. Tell us a little bit about that journey. What were some of the highs and what were some of the lows?
Well, let's talk about how it started first, because I think that's really, I mean, how did I become an entrepreneur? I mean, I had a degree in music, so I didn't start out to be an entrepreneur. I taught music for 1 year and said there has to be another way to make a living. I can't do this. And I had adopted 3 children, one with special needs, and I wanted my children to be first. That meant working for a boss wasn't really an option. So it's like, okay, what is a problem in the world that I can solve that other people will pay me for?
Mm.
And I literally went to the playground in New York City and I would just sit there and listen to conversations. And originally, I grew up on a farm, so I'm pretty handy. I could do small plumbing things and electrical things. And I was thinking, I could be a handy girl, and not, we lived in 5 high rises.
Yep.
But in New York, you had to be part of the union. So I was like, okay, well, I can't do that. So I heard other things, like I heard people talking about clutter and disorganization.
Mhm.
And I thought they didn't have my mother and father. I'm not a naturally organized person. I was trained as a musician. I have been diagnosed with ADHD. I like to start things. I don't like to finish them. I like the big picture and I don't like the details. So I can make a mess faster than anybody you've ever seen. But I grew up in a household where, first of all, we didn't have a whole lot of space. And my mother was the executive assistant to the president of a bank. So she just lived in an organized way, not a neat way. You know, that old saying about a place for everything and everything in its place is a complete lie,
Mm.
because life happens. I mean, clutter happens. It's half right. A place for everything is essential. And if you have clutter and you don't know what to do with it, then that's a problem. So at
Mm.
any rate, I thought, okay, I can do that. So I took $7 out of the grocery money, which was a big deal because I used to walk 20 blocks because I didn't have 50 cents for the bus. And it said disorganized, I organize closets, files, kitchens, you name it, call Barbara Hemphill. And I got 3 crank calls from guys trying to pick me up.
Yes.
And the fourth call was from a widow, 55 years old, whose husband was a solo practitioner lawyer and had left piles of paper everywhere. And she didn't have a clue. And I went in, I charged $10 an hour and lived in horror that somebody would ask me what made me think I was worth $10 an hour. And that's how I started. And to promote it, I would speak at church groups and parent teacher associations and garden clubs and anybody that would let me. And then that was how I got my clients. The way the first big thing was that I quickly learned that paper was the #1 problem. And people kept asking me, and in those days, it was bank statements, because we used to get our canceled checks wrapped up in bank statements in big, thick envelopes, and we put them in boxes, and they would be under the bed and in the garage and in the attic. And people would say, how long do you keep those? Or how long do you keep expired insurance policies and health records and real estate records? I didn't have a clue, but I thought, well, there must be a book at the library. So I went to the library, and much to my amazement, there was not one. And I thought, that's pretty amazing, because it doesn't matter if you earn $18,000 a year or $800,000 a year, you still need to know the answer to that question.
Mm.
So I wrote a book in 1988 called Taming the Paper Tiger, which addressed every single piece of paper that comes into the household. And that book exists today, although it's called Organizing at Home, What to Toss and How to Find the Rest. And it doesn't tell you exactly what to do. It tells you what questions to ask so that you can decide what you will do.
Yes, back to the what will you do as opposed to what should you do, which in business in general is such brilliant, in life is such brilliant advice, because people should on us all the time. We should on ourselves all the time. And it really is about what will you actually do? You know, I
Right.
work with a lot of clients, and I was just talking to a woman before this podcast about how many coaches and coaching programs she's been in, and they all insist that she do things their way, their process, their system. And she feels shoulded upon and made wrong, and none of them work for her. It's not her style, it's not her way, so she didn't get results. So yeah, it's about what will you do, what will be effective. So let's talk about your business a little more. What were some of the real so that's a very entrepreneurial start. I love it. And I love the audacity of that big risk, because back then that was a huge risk proportion.
Well, let me tell you here's what happened that was like, I mean, you talked about highs and lows. I'll give you a rock bottom low. So I wrote Taming the Paper Tiger. I just wrote it. I didn't have any plans. I just wrote the book. And I happened to have a client who worked for a publisher in New York, but I was so naive. I didn't know that was a good thing, really. I mean, I didn't really have a clue what to do, but I thought I would ask her. So I told her, I said, I've written this book and I don't know what to do with it. So she said, well, tell me about it. So I told her, and she said, oh, she said, I think my publisher would be interested. And she flew me to I don't remember, the client did. I got to fly to New York and go to this publishing. I mean, I was like, I'm a farm girl from Nebraska. I'm on an airplane flying to New York to talk about a book contract. You know, I was like ecstatic. Well, they bought it, and they actually paid me a fee to publish this book. It was published, and the month it came out, it was excerpt in Reader's Digest worldwide. Talk
Wow.
about a high. That's the good
Yeah.
news.
Yes.
The bad news was the publishing company that was Dodd Mead, which was one of the oldest, most respected publishers in America, declared bankruptcy.
Oh.
So at the same time, it was in Reader's Digest worldwide. It was in no bookstores anywhere. And not only that, I had to buy my own manuscript back.
Oh, no.
because it was their property.
Right. And held because they were in
So
bankruptcy.
I had to pay to buy my own manuscript back. I had to borrow money in the bank. I don't know how the bank, why, I mean, today they wouldn't loan it, but God bless me, and I got it. But now it's like, okay, now what do I do?
Mhm.
Because I didn't have the books. I didn't have the physical books. I just had the manuscript.
Right.
So I borrowed the money to print it. Well, no, first of all, there was a office supply company
Mm,
called Viking Office Supply. And
right.
they had a catalog, and on the front of the catalog was a Mr. Irving Helford who said, if you buy $100 worth of office supplies, we'll send you a clock. And I thought, wait a minute, the book that have written here is about all the things he sells. So this was before the days of answering machines and all that kind of stuff. And I called his office in California,
Mhm.
and I called real early in the morning, like before his secretary would be there. And I got him on the phone, and I told him who I was. And I said, I've just written this book, and it talks about the products you sell. Why can't you give them that away instead of a clock? And they bought 27,000 copies.
Okay. So before they were a thing, you were doing joint venture relationships. Before it was a thing, you were doing self-publishing. Before it was a thing, you were reaching out and getting publishers. And so how do you, and this may be a very counterintuitive question, but how do you think so that you can be that kind of person who, when something hasn't been done before, says, well, I'm just going to go do this, right? So, because many people, when they have seen it, then they might be able to go and repeat it or duplicate it or whatever. But those things didn't exist. So, how did you think about it so that you would actually take action?
Well, one, I mean, I think it's a gift. I think we have different God-given gifts, and part of entrepreneurship is that you're doing what God created you to do. I think that's just really significant. And then the other one is just never giving up. I mean, if you believe and you have to want to do it. I think if you go after it, and I have seen people where they had an idea like that, but their only interest in it was they were going to make money doing it.
Mhm.
And that will work for a period of time, but they will ultimately burn out every single time.
Yes. Yeah.
So, because I do this, my husband is so funny. My husband will say, I'll talk, like I'm speaking this next week for the North Carolina Association of Elder Law Attorneys. And he said to me, what are you speaking on? And I looked at him, I said, you've been married to me for 37 years. I've been speaking about the same thing for 37 years. Now, you mentioned again reinventing. So my company, for a period, I've had 7 different company names.
Mhm.
I started out my company with the name Barbara Hemphill Associates.
Mhm.
And the reason I did that was, number one, I realized that if I named it after myself, marketing was easier because I only had to say my name and not my company name.
Yes.
And I named it Associates because I knew I couldn't do it alone.
Mhm.
And I've joked that my first associate was my hairdresser, because I got I got business by giving speeches. And if my hair didn't look good, I didn't feel comfortable giving a speech. And my second one was a bookkeeper, because I signed up at the local community college to take accounting. I lasted 2 days. And at the end of 2 days, I said, if I have to do this to be a business owner, there's no hope to me. And I immediately hired a bookkeeper. So then I called it for a while, it was Paper Tiger Institute. And then when we moved into the digital age, I didn't want to seem old fashioned. It's like, if people think the only thing I do is paper, they're not going to hire me. So I renamed the company Productive Environment Institute, which is what it is today.
Mhm.
And we define productive environment as an intentional setting in which everyone can accomplish their work and enjoy their lives.
Mm. I love that. And so I love really there's so many different components that you bring into this. So for instance, how important it is to call in support. even if support is your hairdresser, so that you have the confidence to be able to do what you want to do. Because we often have those days where we won't play that bigger game because we don't feel up to it, or we don't feel worthy, or we don't feel good enough, or whatever it may be. And so having a hairdresser and a good hair can be exactly the partner that you need to propel your success. You're also a lifelong learner, and speaking of support, you call in a lot of people to help you. What would you advise people who are listening to this, who are thinking of either getting into business or expanding their business and, moving forward, about hiring people to work with? What do they need? What would you advise people who are perhaps a little older as far as calling in support?
Well, first of all, I mean, people ask me what do you know now that you wish you knew when you'd started? And one of the things was I was very shy about asking for help because I didn't want to appear stupid.
Mhm.
And I missed a huge number of opportunities because people who are successful in business are willing to help other people. Not only are they willing, they like to, because when you're successful, I mean, after a while you can make money and all that, but that isn't what really matters. What really matters is making a difference. And if you can encourage somebody else, that's what you want to do. So one of the things to do is to begin to talk to other people in business. Ask them about their experiences. Ask them what they know that you need to know. Share your dream with people. I mean, I was a loner for so long. I mean, that's the reason I was in the hospital with depression at age 40,
Mhm.
because I was so alone. And I didn't have to be. And asking for help is a sign of wisdom, not weakness.
Mm.
You have to be discerning, because when I first started in organizing, I would have people call me and say, I want to be an organizer. How do you do this? And what do you charge? And I mean, just wanting to pick your brains.
Mhm.
That's not what the kind of help you want to ask are things like, what do you know now that you wish you knew earlier? Or what would be the advice? What's most important? And it's that kind of thing. It's not the kind of things that a coach is help me with my pricing and help me write a business plan. That's not what you ask people that you want to be mentors to you. You ask them, how did you balance work and family and all that sort of thing, which is a whole different way of approaching.
Right. So what, on that note, what would be the advice that you would give your younger self um, when you were first starting out?
Well, one of the things that, and it didn't exactly exist then the way it does now, but the thing that I didn't do nearly as well as I wished I had, and now it's very easy to do, is to keep track of who I knew. So in business terms, it's a CRM, a customer relationship manager is your number one tool.
Right.
And the interesting thing is, I always say with all organizing, there's 3 skill levels that are required: methodology, mechanics, and maintenance. And
Mhm.
when you look at a CRM, the methodology is, which one do I use? Because there are free ones. There are plenty of them out there are free. And there are others that are going to cost you $1,000, thousands of dollars, or hundreds of dollars at least a month. You want to make sure you have the right one. And that's where you want to talk to an experienced business person or a coach to say, what is the right one for me right now?
Mhm.
Mechanics then is, what do I put in it? Because garbage in, garbage out. If you don't categorize those names by vendors or prospects or colleagues or champions or whatever, you're not going to be able to find it. And for us as productivity consultants, that's one of the things we do. We don't do the third one, which is maintenance. And maintenance is, you go to somewhere and you collect a bunch of business cards. You've got to take that information off the business cards and get it into the CRM. We don't do that.
Right.
We'll train you how to do it, or we'll help you hire somebody to do it, but we don't do that. That's not, and part of the reason organizing consultants often charge by the hour, and it doesn't ever work, because organizing consultants are doing all 3 of those levels, and the people end up paying too much for the $15 an hour job.
Right.
And so that's why we don't do that part.
That makes sense. So what do you wish people who are older now and starting out new, or what encouragement would you have for someone who, let's say, a woman who's 68 or a man who's 72, thinking it's too late, I'm too old, I can't get started now? What would you say to them?
Well, first of all, the thing about entrepreneurship is you're never too old for entrepreneurship. I mean, that's the reason entrepreneurs is so wonderful, because entrepreneur means you are bringing value to the marketplace.
Mhm.
So one of the questions, we train certified productive environment specialists, which is I mean, we have a program for that, which is 90-day program. It's online. It's basically a business in a box. It's a licensing program. But one of the things that we do in that is we ask the question, what were you doing when you were 10, 11, and 12 years old?
Mm-hmm.
That is a very important question, because whatever you were doing then says something about what you could be doing now, because it's what you were doing that God created you to do before your parents said, you'll never make a living doing that.
All right, so that's a way to tap into perhaps what your passion or your why might be. And in terms of your indomitable spirit, what do you foresee for your future?
Well, I have a compassion project in India where I met a gentleman on LinkedIn, and I started Shepherd's House Ministry, which is a program in India that I'm working on. I have a big passion for orphans. I'm a connector. In fact, one of my colleagues called me God's switchboard operator. And
Yes.
I think it's true. I mean, I just introduced you to somebody that I hadn't met at all. I mean, somebody introduced me to this woman. I had a call with her. I immediately introduced her to you. You know, it's like, so I want to partner with people like you who are launching things that are new, that are different, that are real and big, and put them together.
Mhm.
One of the values when I was president, I was one of the founders and president of the National Association of Professional Organizers. And my theme was Together We Are Better. And I believe that that is true now more than ever. There is no way that the problems in this world will be solved without collaboration. And part of the reason I think this is a time for women to be leaders is because we're much better collaborators.
Yes.
And in fact, I remember my father, I grew up in a very conservative religious background, and my grandfather used to say that women weren't supposed to be preachers, but they were, because the men had failed. That was 50 years ago, he told me that. And I didn't understand what he was talking about then. I had no idea what he meant. But in retrospect, he was right.
Mm. Yeah.
There, the women are stepping in now because they are collaborative. And so together we are better.
Uh, it's a beautiful phrase and almost a perfect one to end on. But I do want you to tell us about the gift that you have for people that are listening. So tell us about that.
If you go to productiveenvironmentscore.com, there's an online scorecard. It'll take you maybe 5 minutes to fill it out. You can't change what you don't measure. So this scorecard is a way for you to measure your own productivity about your office. Because if you're going to be an entrepreneur, if you're going to start a business, you have to have an office, a command central that actually works, and that you like. It's got to be a place you like to be, because you're going to be dealing with some things there that are not particularly pleasant sometime. And so that means that your environment needs to be pleasant. And so you fill out that scorecard, you will get an office transformation blueprint. One picture is worth 1,000 words. You actually get a 1 page that shows how you construct what you need to have an office that is a productive environment. And then you also get the opportunity for a 30-minute consultation with one of our consultants to customize it for you, to help you figure out, look at this blueprint, see which of those things you have, which they don't. One of the things, people often wait too late to hire a coach, and they waste a whole lot of time doing things that shouldn't have been done at all. So if you're starting a business, get help sooner rather than later, because otherwise you're going to waste your time doing a lot of things that don't really matter. So if you go to productiveenvironmentscore.com, fill out that scorecard, You'll get that on the blueprint will come online. You'll get a link to schedule a call with us, and be sure it'll say, where did you hear about us? And be sure you say Jeanette Anderson, and then we'll know that that's where you came from.
Awesome. And I'm assuming that productiveenvironments.com is the website.
Productive environment, singular, productiveenvironment.com. That's right. And you can also go to barbarahemphill.com, which is my website, which is about Vision Accelerator.
Okay.
And that tells you some of the things that I'm doing there. In terms of what I'm doing, I really don't know. I'll go to my husband and I'll say, oh, I have an idea. And he'll go, oh no. And I meet new, you're an example. I mean, like when you told me what you were doing, it's like, oh, wow, I love that idea. And I love to get on board. And so I really don't know what I'm going to do, but I know that I'm not willing to do anything that doesn't bring me joy.
What a beautiful notion and ending point there. But so you see yourself continuing to work until you die, or until
yeah, I mean, I don't have any retirement. Is my husband's retired and he obviously loves it. Fortunately, and what I do, I can do from anywhere. I do it virtually, which means he doesn't like to travel particularly, but if I become a widow, statistically I may, then that would mean I could still travel and do what I do. So I cannot imagine not doing it. And I tell the consultants that we train, 80% of the time, you should be doing something you can't help doing. It is literally what you were created to do. And 20% of the time, there are things you're going to have to deal with. But if it gets to be, I tell them all, if it gets to be more than 20%, we should talk.
Yes.
Because that means there's some adjustments. And I have reinvented myself many, many times based. And the most recent one that I've learned, I continue to learn, and I've learned that I am far better with speaking words than writing words. So it's much smarter for me to get clients by doing a podcast where I can speak than it is to try to write emails. Right. Because I can do a 30-minute podcast and have a ball. I mean, I love having this conversation with you.
Yes. Yeah.
But if I had to write an email to say the same things, it would have taken me half a day.
Yes. Yes. So find your strengths, use those, follow that passion and that enjoyment, and let yourself have the permission to let it be easy, easier anyways, and not have to be full of shoulds. So Barbara, what's one last piece of advice you'd like to leave everyone with?
Never give up.
Well, I couldn't say that any better. So thank you so much for listening, everybody. I know this was a long interview, but I know it was a fascinating one. I've known Barbara for years. I learned things from this conversation that I hadn't heard or learned before. And I really encourage you, please pass this on to others. So share this episode with people. You never know when someone just might need that little piece of help, that little word here or nugget there that will make their life so much easier. So please, selfishly, I want you to share the podcast, but I really want you to share the brilliant people that I'm bringing you with others who could benefit from their wisdom as well. So pass it on, subscribe, share, like, comment, and do let me know who you want to hear from, what kinds of topics, what kinds of speakers, because I want this to be a resource that helps you to think differently and think like brilliant people like Barbara, who just decides to do it and goes and does it. It's an awesome, awesome trait. Thank you for being here, Barbara. And I really, really appreciate seeing you again and seeing you in a new light, even though I've known you for a while.
Thanks for having me, Jeanette. I love the opportunity and I'm so excited about what you're doing. I cannot wait to see where it goes.
Thank you. Me too. I'm very excited as well. All right, everybody, have a bodacious week. Bye for now. Thank you for listening. I'd love it if you left a comment and subscribed. And I encourage you to apply one aha from this interview right away so you can turn your wisdom into wealth and your contribution into positive change. Bye for now.